So many folks in our industry call it the "you can spam" law, because unsolicited commercial email is allowed provided you're not forging your headers, you have a functional unsubscribe mechanism, you include your address. So you can do it as long as you let people off the hook later. And this, like I mentioned, was in opposition to many folks who were pushing for an opt-in requirement rather than a functional opt-out requirement. But that said, we did get some good things out of it. It outlawed the falsified headers. It did require a functioning opt-out. And it particularly blocked harvesting, which had been a real problem up until that time. Now, it still didn't really reduce the amount of spam. So there's a Spam House press release from this time that I'd like to read to you. Against the advice of all anti-spam organizations, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed the Can Spam Act, a bill backed overwhelmingly by spammers dubbed the You Can Spam Act because it legalizes spamming instead of banning it. Spam king Alan Ralsky told reporters that the passage of the House bill made my day. Spammers say they will now pour money into installations of new spam servers to heavily ramp up their outgoing spam volumes, all legally. It was also heavily promoted by the DMA, so going further. But there is an advantage to the anti-spam community in allowing Congress to go the DMA's route, and that is that with a DMA-backed pro-spam law, this whole spam problem will implode and self-terminate as the entire population revolts, not just against the lawmakers, but against direct marketing itself. The staggering volumes of spam internet users will be subjected to by the DMA's members, who will predictably claim in every spam that this spam is not spam because the law says so. Volumes of junk, many orders of magnitude worse than today's spam problem, will turn the public against all direct marketing. The public will hold direct marketers responsible for the annihilation of email as a communications medium, and that in itself might bring us a new dawn where direct marketing discovers ethics and stops treating the internet as an infinite pool of suckers trained to press delete all day. The DMA is shooting itself in both feet. Should we stop them? And that, my friends, shows you the trouble with predicting the future. In 2004, we do get our first can spam conviction. Nicolas had been driving around the LA suburb of Venice and Marina del Rey using open wireless networks to send porn spam. A lot of people were rather upset that he managed to avoid jail time for this. But nevertheless, he did get a $10,000 fine, 6 months of home detention, and 3 years probation. And his name went down in history. In 2005, Brian McWilliams published a book called Spam Kings. Now, when researching this presentation, a number of folks recommended this book, but I've also seen complaints from some members of our community that say the book is somewhat fictionalized tabloid journalism. So I give you both sides of this, that you might wish to read it. It's a very well-written, engaging book, but also take some of this with a grain of salt. Some of the people who would be key to the stories that this tells refuse to be involved with the book due to some of these concerns, but it's still worth reading, and I think that you'll recognize some folks in there from our industry today. And it does tell some of the stories and give you an idea of some of the early folks in the spam fight. I tried not to repeat a lot of those stories here, so if you are still further interested, you're not going to see a lot of stuff that you've already heard today. So let's talk about some of the ways that the spammers are trying to get out of being filtered. Every time I show this cartoon to marketers, they don't think it's funny. They're really excited for new info. So I mentioned before about word salad. Word salad is a type of what we call Bayesian poisoning. So if you have a system that is weighting words based on how bad they might be, you can include a whole bunch of random text to completely kill that and just balance out the bad words with lots of good words. And they included things like dictionary entries, Wikipedia, news keywords, and even junk HTML tags as a means of getting through the filters that were checking for content. Image spam came in around 2003. And particularly interesting was that spammers realized at this point that text filtering was getting more and more effective, IP-based filtering getting more and more effective. So what are they going to do next? Well, they figured out that they could take a picture of text and just send you a picture where you would get the words, just like here. You know, it looks like an email, but actually it's an image. And at the time, the anti-spam filters were not prepared to deal with this. They had been more or less ignoring the content of images up until that time because, whatever, it's a picture. Well, at this point, that's very hard to filter, and in response, the filtering organizations just block messages that are only a picture. So for folks on the sender side who've always wondered, why can't I just send one giant picture and have it get through just fine? Well, it's because of the image spammers that started out in 2003. Now, if you've just got a black and white image with text and a white background, that starts to be relatively easy to filter out from a filtering perspective because you can check on the bit color and then map it. But once they started to do some of this, the spammers would create scripts to modify each image slightly. So you could no longer do a checksum, and they would include CAPTCHA-like techniques so that it was harder and harder for anybody to filter out a message or to map out the text beyond actually loading the image directly. Now, even in most spam, you require a link as a call to action. Most spammers, like most marketers, want you to click on a link in response to their message. They want you to click and either download some malware or buy something or whatever the case is. But you need to be able to take action. Image spam changed all that, where if you're sending an image, you're not sending a link. So what are you going to do about that? Well, they found one very interesting scam, and that was pump and dump stock scams, where they would find a very low value penny stock, and they would try to get people to go buy it the day before, and then dump it off, sell it high and make a ton of money. And they were doing this by sending out images that would say, here's a hot stock tip, buy this stock symbol. So from the user perspective, they're going to their broker, they're going to Merrill Lynch or Charles Schwab or whoever and say, buy this stock for me. So they're not worried about engaging with a criminal business. They're not worried about malware. And there's a much higher trust because they say, oh, I know my broker, it's totally safe. I'm going over here and I'm just buying this thing. And I'm not spending a lot of money, whatever. But correspondingly, they're all driving up the price of this stock. So while most spam needs that link, this was a way that they could get something out of it without including a link. In fact, it was very effective. You'll see buying the day before and selling the day after made an average of 4.9%. And there were some interesting stories where some of the traders, some of the higher volume traders who were involved in this, even knew that it was a scam, but figured that they could ride the wave of what the spammers were doing and make some money anyways. It's hard to overstate just how bad image spam was in the mid-2000s. So it was one particular group of spammers, as it turns out, that were responsible for this. Some systems registered as much as 50% of all spam was image spam at the peak in 2006. So between 2003 and 2006, it's going all the way up from 0 to sometimes over 50%, 40%, depending on your business. But in 2007, the SEC started getting serious about this. Of all governmental organizations to upset, the SEC really does not play around with low-level criminals. They started what they called Operation Spam-A-Lot, and March 8th, 2007, they suspended 35 companies from trading. Now, the companies that were in these stock scams, some of them knew what was going on, but a lot of them didn't. So sometimes what was happening was an executive would wake up one day for this mid to low level business and say, what the heck is going on here? So this was a big mess for the SEC to sort out, because some of these folks were intentionally in league with the spammers, but a lot of them were more or less innocent victims of the same crime. But Operation Spamalot did catch the main gang that was using image spam. And it was a dramatic drop, such that standard amounts of image spam are maybe around 10% these days, all the way up from 40, even as low as 4 or 5, depending on your organization. That said, for the senders, still today, sending out a message that's all images is not going to get you into the inbox. Around this time, there's another early spammer I'd like to share with you. Now, one of my friends who I don't see in the audience today said he really wanted me to talk about this fellow, so I'm going to have to poke him at lunch one of these days. But Walt Picklejar Rhines had been a former partner of Spamford Wallace, and he created a company called Odysseus Marketing, where he was luring people in with the promise of downloading free music, and they would get the Kazanon adware, and it would also install Client Man, which was the adware in the background. So what it would do is it would hijack your search results. Instead of wherever you were normally searching for, it would give you all paid placement, and it was very difficult, if not impossible, to uninstall. He was very adamant that he was not installing spyware, so nobody should be upset, because they all consented to the terms of service. But the FTC did not agree with him. He had a really stringent settlement, actually. It was pretty amazing. In November 21st, 2006, it barred his company and him personally from doing all these things. Let me give you the list, because it's amazing. It barred him from exploiting any security vulnerability to download or install software. It required him to obtain consumers' express consent before downloading any software, and bars them from installing software that cannot be readily uninstalled. It prohibits him from redirecting consumers' computers to sites or servers other than those that they selected to visit, from changing any default browser homepage, from modifying or replacing the search features of any search engine. It also prohibited them from making deceptive representations, and requires that they destroy all the personal information that they had collected, and prohibits them from collecting or disclosing personal information in the future unless they have express consent. It also required him to obtain a $500,000 performance bond before downloading or installing software that causes the display of ads. Finally, it imposed a $1.75 million judgment, but only $10,000 of that was actually paid because he didn't have any money anymore. So another person put into bankruptcy by their spamming ways. Now, in the mid-2000s, we started to see a lot of social media spam. Email was becoming a more and more difficult place for the spammers, so they moved on to Myspace. What they would do is they would create these fake profiles used to promote adult sites, sometimes scam, sometimes not, using chatbots. One advantage is that that these companies had to rely on paid employees to fight spam. And so a lot of times, because the social media companies were starting out as small startups, they didn't have an anti-abuse person on staff and were often taken by surprise. Anthony Greco wrote a program to create 27,000 fake MySpace accounts. And then he sent them 1.5 million IMs from these fake accounts with ads for mortgage refinancing and pornography. And then he decided to try to blackmail the MySpace executives by asking for exclusive rights to spam their servers And if they didn't give him exclusive rights, that he was going to sell, or he was going to pass on his means of exploiting their servers to the whole spam community. Lo and behold, that did not work out for him, and he was arrested. He was 18 at the time, and I'm sure has gone on to an illustrious career. Facebook also got a lot of spammers as Facebook became big. Clickjacking was a new technique that you would see at Facebook, where your friends supposedly liked an article, so then you'd go check it out. But then what you didn't know was that behind the scenes, that page was running a script that would make it so that you liked the article as well. So things were going viral without anybody's intent to do that. So together, spam and filtering are evolving. Each system is evolving greater defenses against the other. In 2003, spam globalizes, is starting to push for that. So over the course of the 10 years in the mid-2000s, the actual source of the spam switches. So in 2003, this is where you see the location of the origination of spam. And 39% of it was in the United States. Most of the other places were all smaller chunks of that. But US is now still a good portion of spam, but far, far less than it used to be. So these are numbers from 2013, and you can see the really big shift where for all that the US has got some relatively lax laws, it does have a very vigilant anti-spam population, and so the spammers have often moved to other countries, or rather the spam sources have. Whitelisting and blacklisting became, fairly effective, but in turn, they also created rise to other techniques. So when people were trying to evade blacklisting, in turn, we get botnets. So if you can block my IP, that's fine, I'll use other people's. We also get snowshoe spam, where you are sneaking in little bits of very bad traffic with otherwise good traffic. And spam trap identification services, where people are trying to get away from being blacklisted in the first place. In turn, you get better spam traps and domain blocking. Whitelisting, on the other hand, is effective but limited. So if I say only these 5 people can email me, then great, nobody else can email me. However, in turn, we get a push for header forging and incentives to hack and malware and phishing. Because if I'm whitelisting just 5 people and you can fake it like you're one of those 5, then I have no more defenses. And if you can hack one of those 5, then I have no more defenses. So in turn, you get better and more complex whitelisting techniques and sender authentication, where I can verify for sure that you are who you say you are. In which case, we get more incentives to hack. And similarly, we get sysadmins that won't whitelist anything anymore. In April 2009, the University of Washington published a paper studying spamming on botnets. Let me give you a quote from this. The amount of outgoing spam an individual bot can generate is vastly different across botnets. MegaD and SriZB bots are the most egregious. They can send out more than 1,500 messages per minute, using as many as 80 parallel connections at a time, and appear to be limited only by the client's bandwidth. On the other hand, Rustek and Storm are polite to the victim. They send messages at a slow and constant rate and are unlikely to saturate the victim's network connection. Big variability in send rates suggests these rates might be useful in fingerprinting and distinguishing various botnets. As it turns out, these botnets and many of their CNC servers hosted by Mikolo, a US-based hosting provider. On November 11th, Mikolo was taken offline by its ISPs, and as a result, the amount of spam reaching the University of Washington dropped by almost 60%. As of February 2009, the amount of spam reaching us has steadily increased to around 80% of the pre-shutdown levels, as some of the botnet operators have been able to redirect their bots to new CNC servers. And in addition, new botnets have sprung up to replace the old ones. Botnets carefully design and hand-tune custom spam subjects to defeat filters and attract attention. We have found that between any two spam botnets, there is no overlap in subjects sent within a given day, and an average overlap of 0.3% during the length of our study. This suggests that subjects are useful for classifying spam messages as being sent by a particular botnet.